For most of his life, Duke Sebastian Ashcroft had been the most admired man in England, or so people claimed. Wherever he traveled, doors opened before he reached them. Smiles appeared before he spoke. Men praised his judgment. Women praised his charm. Newspapers praised his accomplishments. Yet the older he became, the more he noticed something unsettling beneath every compliment. People never looked at him first. They looked at what belonged to him. They looked at the vast Ashcroft estate stretching across the countryside. They looked at the investments that touched nearly every corner of the kingdom. They looked at the title that had survived generations and the fortune that had grown larger with each passing year. By 38, Sebastian possessed more wealth than most noble families combined. And he had never felt more alone. On winter evenings he often sat beside the fire in Ashcroft Manor and wondered a simple thing. If everything vanished tomorrow, who would remain? The question followed him through every season. It lingered through business meetings. It lingered through dinners. It lingered through courtship. Especially courtship. When Lady Clarissa Fairchild entered his life, society immediately declared the match perfect. She was beautiful, fashionable, admired in every drawing room from London to York. Her laughter sparkled at parties. Her gowns appeared in newspapers. Men envied Sebastian. Women envied Clarissa. Together they seemed destined for a storybook marriage. Yet Sebastian noticed things others did not. Clarissa spoke often about his properties. She admired his ballroom more than his books. She asked about investments more often than his thoughts. Whenever he attempted to discuss dreams, fears, or ordinary hopes, her attention drifted elsewhere. At first he ignored his doubts. Then he began watching. And the more carefully he watched, the more convinced he became that Clarissa loved the life surrounding him far more than the man himself. By the time their wedding approached, the old question had become impossible to silence. If everything vanished tomorrow, who would remain? 3 months before the ceremony, Sebastian finally devised an answer. The plan was outrageous, possibly foolish, certainly dangerous, which was precisely why it would work. On the morning of the wedding, the roads leading to St. Edmund's Church filled with noble guests. Elegant carriages rolled across the countryside. Servants hurried through crowds. Ladies displayed elaborate gowns and jeweled parasols. Gentlemen discussed fortunes and politics beneath bright summer skies. Everyone waited for the arrival of England's richest duke. Many expected 6 horses. Some expected 8. Others predicted a golden coach worthy of royalty. No one expected a bicycle. A murmur spread through the crowd first. Then confusion. Then laughter. Sebastian rode slowly up the church lane on a plain black bicycle with polished handlebars and simple wheels. No servants followed behind him. No carriage accompanied him. No family crest decorated the frame. He looked perfectly calm. The crowd did not. Whispers erupted immediately. What happened? Has he lost everything? Surely there has been some disaster. Perhaps the Ashcroft fortune is gone. Within minutes speculation transformed into certainty. People always preferred certainty, especially when it required no evidence. The whispers grew sharper. Guests who had once spoken proudly of their friendship suddenly avoided him. Business associates exchanged concerned looks. Noble women covered their smiles behind lace gloves. Sebastian noticed every reaction. That was the point. Inside the church, the atmosphere changed completely. What should have been excitement became discomfort. People stared. People judged. People calculated. And then came the moment Sebastian had secretly feared most. Lady Clarissa Fairchild approached him near the altar. For a brief second he hoped. Perhaps he had been wrong. Perhaps she would laugh at the absurd bicycle and marry him anyway. Perhaps there truly was love beneath the glitter. Instead, Clarissa's eyes settled upon him with visible disappointment. Not concern. Not loyalty. Disappointment. The distinction struck harder than any insult. "Tell me this isn't true," she whispered. Sebastian met her gaze. What if it is? Color drained from her face. Around them, guests leaned forward. The church fell silent. Clarissa slowly removed the diamond engagement ring from her finger. The tiny sound of metal against skin seemed louder than thunder. "I refuse to tie my future to failure," she said. Gasps echoed through the chapel. Then another figure stepped forward. Marquis Nathaniel Blackthorne. Young, wealthy, ambitious. Outside the church waited a magnificent carriage gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. Clarissa accepted his offered arm. Without another glance, she turned away from the altar. The crowd followed. Not all at once. One by one. Then dozens at a time. Guests abandoned their seats. Friends disappeared. Supporters vanished. The church emptied with astonishing speed. Within minutes, the grand wedding became a hollow shell filled only with silence. Sebastian stood alone before the altar and watched the final guests leave through the doors. Almost alone. Near the back pew remained a single woman. Miss Evelyn Whitmore. 26 years old. Quiet. Elegant. Nearly invisible to most of society. A childhood carriage accident had left her with a slight limp, and fashionable circles had spent years treating her as though one imperfect step diminished every other quality she possessed. While others chased wealth and status, Evelyn simply stood there, waiting. When the last echoes faded and the church finally emptied, she walked slowly toward him. Outside, rain began tapping softly against stained glass windows. Sebastian looked at the only person who had stayed. "Why are you still here?" he asked. Evelyn's answer came without hesitation. Because nobody should stand alone on their wedding day. For the first time since sunrise, the Duke smiled, and somewhere beyond the rain-soaked church doors, the strangest test in England had finally begun. Rain followed them out of the church like a curtain falling on a ruined play. The guests were gone. The music had ended. The flowers scattered across the church steps lay crushed beneath muddy footprints left by people who had once called themselves friends. For several moments neither Sebastian nor Evelyn spoke. Only the soft rhythm of rainfall filled the silence. Then Evelyn bent carefully and gathered a white rose from the ground. Its petals were stained with mud. Without a word she brushed it clean. Sebastian watched her. Most people would have hurried away from humiliation. Most people would have pretended not to see it. Yet here she was, rescuing flowers abandoned by strangers. "Those are ruined," he said quietly. Evelyn examined the rose. "Not ruined," she replied. "Only bruised." The words struck him unexpectedly. He could not explain why. Perhaps because they sounded less like a judgment about the flower and more like a judgment about him. Together they collected the discarded bouquets. The rain soaked their sleeves. Mud stained their shoes. Neither seemed to care. When the final flower had been gathered, Sebastian offered to escort her home. Evelyn accepted. They walked slowly through wet streets lined with whispering spectators. News traveled quickly in England. By sunset, nearly everyone already knew about the wedding disaster. People stared openly. Some pitied Sebastian. Others secretly enjoyed his fall. A few laughed. Evelyn ignored them all. She spoke to him exactly as she had before the wedding. No hesitation. No awkwardness. No change. The consistency fascinated him. It also deepened his curiosity. For years he had wondered whether anyone could separate the man from the fortune. Now he intended to discover the truth. The following afternoon he invited Evelyn to take tea at a small cottage on one of his lesser properties. Not the manor. Not the estate everyone admired. A modest place. Simple. Quiet. Intentionally unimpressive. Evelyn arrived carrying homemade biscuits. Sebastian nearly laughed. No guest had ever brought him anything before. People usually arrived expecting gifts from him. Not the other way around. As they sat beside a rain-speckled window, he began the next stage of his test. "My situation may be worse than people think," he said. Evelyn looked concerned. "Because of the wedding?" Sebastian nodded. "I fear some investments have failed." The lie felt strange. "I may lose much more than my reputation." Evelyn listened carefully. She asked no questions about money. Instead she asked whether he was sleeping, whether he had eaten, whether he was managing the stress. By the end of the conversation, Sebastian felt oddly guilty. Not because he was deceiving her. Because she genuinely cared. Days became weeks. The friendship continued. Whenever they met, Sebastian painted an increasingly bleak picture of his future. He mentioned creditors. He spoke of shrinking income. He hinted that some estates might need to be sold. Each statement was another stone placed upon the scale. Each statement tested whether Evelyn's loyalty would shift. It never did. If anything, she became kinder. The realization unsettled him. One afternoon they walked through gardens washed golden by autumn sunlight. Sebastian noticed her slight limp becoming more pronounced as the path climbed uphill. "You should rest," he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I've heard that advice for 17 years. Something in her tone made him stop. For the first time she spoke openly about herself. When she was 9 years old, a carriage horse had bolted during a storm. The accident shattered part of her leg. Doctors saved her life. They could not fully restore her walk. The injury healed. Society never did. As she grew older, invitations became fewer. Suitors became rarer. Whispers became common. People rarely insulted her directly. They simply overlooked her. Beautiful women were celebrated. Perfect women were pursued. Women with visible imperfections were quietly set aside. "I learned something useful," Evelyn said as they sat beneath an oak tree. "What was that?" "The people who leave first were never truly staying." Sebastian stared at her. The wisdom in the statement carried the weight of years. How many disappointments had shaped such understanding? How many rejections had she endured with grace? For the first time he began seeing not merely kindness in Evelyn, but courage. A quieter kind than society admired. A deeper kind. The kind forged by loneliness. As autumn deepened, so did their connection. They spent long afternoons reading. They shared stories beside fireplaces. They discovered a mutual love for history, music, and old letters. Laughter came more easily. Silences became comfortable. Something precious began growing between them. Something neither fully named. Meanwhile, society remained cruel. Lady Clarissa's engagement to Marquis Blackthorn became the season's favorite topic. Every newspaper praised their glamorous future. Whenever Sebastian's name appeared, it was accompanied by mockery. Soon the ridicule found a new target. Evelyn. One columnist referred to her as the bicycle bride. The phrase spread through drawing rooms like wildfire. Ladies repeated it while laughing behind fans. Gentlemen repeated it over cigars. The nickname became fashionable. Cruelty often did. When Sebastian first heard it, anger surged through him. He expected Evelyn to be hurt. Instead she surprised him. "The bicycle bride," she repeated thoughtfully. Then she smiled. "You know, I rather like it." Sebastian blinked. "You do? It reminds me that I stayed." The simplicity of the answer left him speechless. Others saw humiliation. She saw loyalty. Others remembered scandal. She remembered choice. That night Sebastian found himself thinking about her long after darkness settled across the manor. For years he had attended grand balls filled with celebrated beauties. Yet none occupied his thoughts the way Evelyn did. Not because she demanded attention. Because she never did. Several days later, a violent storm swept across the countryside. Wind bent trees. Rain hammered the earth. Sebastian insisted on escorting Evelyn home after visiting a nearby village. Halfway down a slippery lane, her weakened leg suddenly gave way. For a terrifying instant she fell toward the flooded ground. Without thinking, Sebastian lunged forward. His arms caught her before she struck the earth. The world seemed to pause. Rain fell around them. Thunder rolled in the distance. Evelyn's hand rested against his chest. His arm remained around her waist. Neither moved. Neither looked away. And in that suspended moment, standing beneath a storm-dark sky, Sebastian realized his test was no longer the thing frightening him most. The frightening truth was that he had begun to care what would happen if Evelyn ever chose to leave. Winter approached London beneath silver skies and sharp winds, but inside the city's grandest drawing rooms, excitement flourished. Society had found a new spectacle to celebrate. Lady Clarissa Fairchild's engagement to Marquis Nathaniel Blackthorn dominated every conversation. Newspapers praised their beauty, their wealth, and their perfect social standing. Invitations bearing their names circulated through noble circles like prized treasures. The aristocracy adored a triumphant love story, especially one wrapped in diamonds and status. Sebastian Ashcroft read the headlines with detached amusement. Evelyn Whitmore read them not at all. She had spent too many years being judged by strangers to care about their opinions now. Yet even she could not avoid the invitation that arrived one frosted morning. The season's grand winter ball. Hosted by the Blackthorns. Attendance expected. Refusal impossible. When Sebastian unfolded the invitation beside the fire, he immediately understood its true purpose. It was not a celebration. It was a stage. And Clarissa intended to perform. "You needn't attend," he told Evelyn. She looked across the room from her chair near the window. "If I stay away, they win." The quiet certainty in her voice surprised him. "You know they will be cruel." A small smile touched her lips. "They already are." The answer settled the matter. Several nights later, hundreds of carriages lined the illuminated streets leading to Blackthorn House. Crystal chandeliers glowed through towering windows. Music drifted into the winter air. Footmen hurried across marble steps while guests emerged dressed in silks, jewels, and velvet. Sebastian arrived beside Evelyn. The moment they entered, conversation faltered. Not completely. Only enough. Enough to notice. Enough to wound. Eyes followed them through the ballroom. Whispers floated between fans. Smiles appeared that never reached anyone's eyes. Clarissa noticed their arrival immediately. She stood near the center of the room wearing silver satin and enough diamonds to rival a royal treasury. When she saw Sebastian and Evelyn together, satisfaction flickered across her face. The hunt had begun. For the first hour, insults remained subtle. Ladies exchanged amused glances. Gentlemen chuckled behind crystal glasses. Groups conveniently stopped talking whenever Evelyn approached. The ballroom sparkled with elegance while cruelty moved invisibly beneath its surface. Then the mockery became less subtle. During a dance, a young countess exaggerated a limp while crossing the floor. Several women laughed. Another noblewoman nearly tripped herself attempting the same performance. The laughter grew louder. Evelyn pretended not to notice. Sebastian noticed everything. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched. The urge to confront them rose like fire inside him. Yet Evelyn remained composed. Gracefully composed. As though she had endured such treatment long enough to become immune. The realization hurt him more than the insults themselves. No one should become accustomed to humiliation. As the evening progressed, the jokes changed targets. A gentleman loudly wondered whether bicycles were now considered formal transportation. His companions erupted with laughter. Another suggested the ballroom install a bicycle rack beside the entrance. More laughter followed. Soon conversations throughout the room echoed with references to wheels, pedals, and broken fortunes. The nickname returned. The bicycle bride. Again and again. Every repetition revealed more about the speakers than about Evelyn. Still she endured. Still she smiled politely. Still she refused to surrender her dignity. Sebastian found himself admiring her strength with increasing awe. Then Clarissa struck directly. Near midnight the orchestra concluded a waltz and guests gathered around the central floor. Clarissa stepped forward with a champagne glass raised elegantly in one hand. The room quieted. Everyone expected a celebratory toast. They received something far uglier. "I wish to thank fate," she announced brightly. Laughter sparkled beneath her words. "After all, it rescued me from a very unfortunate future." Guests smiled knowingly. Clarissa continued. "There was a time I nearly married a man whose fortune appeared secure." More laughter. "Thankfully I learned the truth before it was too late." The crowd responded with approving chuckles. She glanced deliberately toward Sebastian. Then toward Evelyn. "And I am grateful that another lady was willing to inherit my mistake." The ballroom erupted. Some laughed openly. Others attempted restraint. Few succeeded. Sebastian felt rage surge through him. Before he could respond, Evelyn lightly touched his sleeve. The gesture stopped him. Not because the insult was harmless. Because she refused to let cruelty dictate her behavior. The moment might have continued indefinitely had fate not intervened. An elderly servant carrying a silver tray suddenly staggered near the refreshment table. His face drained of color. The tray slipped from his hands. Crystal shattered across the marble floor. Then he collapsed. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Music stopped. Conversation vanished. Hundreds of guests turned toward the fallen man. No one moved. Some stared. Some frowned. A few stepped backward to avoid becoming involved. The servant lay motionless. Seconds passed. Then Evelyn crossed the room. Ignoring her injured leg, she hurried through the crowd. Pain flashed across her face, yet she never slowed. She knelt beside the unconscious servant on the cold marble floor. Guests watched in stunned silence. Evelyn checked his breathing, lifted his head, loosened his collar, spoke calmly to frightened attendants. Years earlier she had cared for her father during a long illness. Those difficult months had taught her far more than society ever knew. The servant struggled for breath. Evelyn remained steady, patient, focused. She directed others to bring water, to open windows, to fetch a physician. At last the man's breathing stabilized. Color slowly returned to his face. Relief swept across the room. The servant opened his eyes. His trembling hand found Evelyn's. Tears filled them both. A stunned hush settled over the ballroom. Moments earlier those same guests had mocked her limp. Now they watched her kneeling on that injured leg to save a life. Shame began spreading through the crowd. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Clarissa stood frozen. For the first time all evening, admiration belonged entirely to someone else. Sebastian could not look away from Evelyn. In that moment he saw not merely kindness. He saw character. Not merely compassion. Courage. Not merely grace. Greatness. The realization struck with absolute certainty. He loved her. The truth arrived suddenly yet felt older than memory itself. Later, after the ball finally ended, snow drifted softly across moonlit gardens beyond the mansion. The world seemed quieter there, untouched by gossip and vanity. Sebastian led Evelyn beneath bare winter trees glittering with frost. Neither spoke for several moments. Then he reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. Evelyn stared at it. Her breath caught. The entire world seemed to pause once more as Sebastian opened the box and revealed a ring that gleamed beneath the moonlight. Before she could speak, before she could even fully understand what was happening, he looked into her eyes and asked the question that would change everything. The engagement announcement spread across England faster than spring sunlight across a frozen field. By the end of the week, every newspaper carried the story. Duke Sebastian Ashcroft would marry Miss Evelyn Whitmore. The reactions were immediate. Some celebrated. Many questioned. Others mocked. The same people who had laughed at Evelyn's limp and called her the bicycle bride suddenly found themselves discussing wedding invitations. Yet beneath every conversation lingered the same assumption. Sebastian Ashcroft remained a fallen duke, a respected name attached to fading fortunes, a man whose wealth had vanished long before his pride. No one suspected otherwise. That was exactly as Sebastian intended. Months passed. The wedding day arrived beneath a cloudless summer sky. St. Edmund's Church stood exactly as it had on the day of his humiliation. The same stone walls, the same stained glass windows, the same bell tower rising above the countryside. Even many of the same guests returned. Some came from curiosity. Others came to witness what they assumed would be a modest ceremony between two unfortunate souls who had settled for one another after society turned away. Carriages began arriving shortly after sunrise. At first nobody noticed anything unusual. Then a second wave arrived. Then a third. Then a fourth. Soon the roads surrounding the church became crowded with vehicles bearing crests from every corner of Britain. Guests standing near the entrance exchanged confused glances. Who had invited so many important people? The mystery deepened as increasingly powerful figures appeared. Prominent bankers stepped from polished coaches. Members of Parliament arrived in decorated carriages. Industrial magnates emerged beside liveried servants. Foreign diplomats representing distant nations entered the churchyard. The crowd grew restless. Whispers spread. Questions multiplied. Then royal representatives arrived carrying the insignia of the crown. The entire atmosphere shifted. Silence rolled through the gathering. Even the most arrogant nobles suddenly stood straighter. Inside the church, Clarissa Fairchild sat rigidly beside Marquis Blackthorne. The marriage that had once appeared triumphant had proven less magical than she imagined. Nathaniel valued appearances as much as she did. Perhaps more. Their conversations revolved around status. Their affection had cooled. Their ambitions had not. Still, Clarissa maintained her elegant composure. Until she noticed the guests. The names. The titles. The power gathered within those walls. Confusion crept into her expression. Why would such people attend Sebastian's wedding? Across the aisle, Evelyn prepared quietly in a small chamber behind the sanctuary. Unlike her first entrance into society, she felt no need to prove herself. The ivory gown she wore was beautiful without being extravagant. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From anticipation. The months since Sebastian's proposal had transformed her life. For the first time she belonged somewhere. For the first time she was loved without conditions. Yet one question still lingered. Sebastian had never fully explained how he continued supporting his properties despite the financial troubles he described. Whenever she asked, he smiled and changed the subject. Today, however, something about his expression seemed different. Calmer. Almost relieved. As though a burden he had carried for months was finally nearing its end. The church bells began ringing. Guests took their seats. The ceremony commenced. Sebastian stood before the altar wearing a dark formal coat embroidered with silver thread. Confidence radiated from him. Not arrogance. Certainty. The kind possessed by a man who no longer feared the truth. The vows proceeded beautifully. Evelyn walked down the aisle. Sunlight streamed through stained glass and painted colors across her gown. Several guests who had once mocked her found themselves unable to look away. The woman they had dismissed now carried herself with remarkable grace. When she reached Sebastian, he smiled exactly as he had on that rainy afternoon outside the abandoned church. Only deeper. Warmer. The vows concluded. The priest offered his blessing. Then Sebastian did something unexpected. Instead of immediately leading Evelyn from the altar, he turned toward the congregation. "I have one final matter to address," he said. The church fell silent. His voice carried easily through the room. "Many months ago, I arrived at this church on a bicycle." Uneasy laughter flickered and vanished. I watched people decide my worth based upon what they believed I possessed. No one moved. No one spoke. I watched friendships disappear. His gaze swept across familiar faces. I watched business partners retreat. Several gentlemen lowered their eyes. I watched servants remain loyal. Others straightened proudly. And I watched my fiancée abandon me. Clarissa's face turned pale. Attention settled over the congregation. Slow. Heavy. Unavoidable. Sebastian reached into his coat and removed a collection of papers. I never lost my fortune. The words struck like thunder. For several seconds nobody reacted. The statement seemed too impossible to process. Then whispers erupted. Shock spread across the pews. Confusion transformed into disbelief. Sebastian waited. I remain exactly what I was before the bicycle arrived. The murmuring intensified. The richest duke in England. The church exploded into chaos. Gasps echoed from every corner. Guests stared openly. Bankers nodded knowingly. Diplomats exchanged amused looks. Many suddenly realized why so many influential figures had attended. They had known all along. Clarissa looked as though the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Color drained from her face. Her husband appeared equally stunned. Memories flooded her expression. The ring removed at the altar. The public rejection. The laughter. The triumph she had celebrated. All of it shattered at once. Sebastian continued speaking. The bicycle was never about money. The room quieted again. It was about character. One by one he acknowledged those who had remained loyal. Servants. Workers. Estate managers. Ordinary people who had chosen kindness over convenience. Each received public recognition. Several would later receive promotions, pensions, and opportunities that changed their lives forever. Then came the names of those who had abandoned him. Sebastian did not insult them. He simply revealed the truth. Sometimes truth wounds more deeply than anger ever could. Shame swept through the church. People who once mocked him now struggled to meet his gaze. Yet the greatest surprise was still to come. When Sebastian finished, he turned toward Evelyn. Emotion filled his eyes. This woman believed I was ruined. The congregation watched silently. She stayed anyway. Every eye shifted toward her. She expected hardship. His voice softened. And chose me regardless. The admiration filling the church felt completely different from the shallow approval society usually offered. It was genuine. For the first time, people saw Evelyn clearly. Not her limp. Not her nickname. Her heart. The moment might have ended there. It would have been satisfying. It would have been deserved. Instead, Evelyn stepped forward and gently took Sebastian's hand. The church waited. Many expected revenge. Others expected condemnation. What they received left them even more astonished. Please forgive them, she said quietly. The words hung in the air. Disbelief crossed countless faces. Evelyn looked toward the very people who had mocked her. The women who had imitated her limp. The men who had laughed at bicycles. The friends who had abandoned Sebastian. Compassion softened her expression. If kindness only exists when it is easy, she said, then it is not kindness at all. Silence followed. Uncomfortable. Transformative. Several guests began crying. Others lowered their heads in shame. Even people who had never liked Evelyn found themselves moved. At last Sebastian understood something remarkable. His test had revealed greed. But Evelyn's response revealed something greater than loyalty. It revealed mercy. And as the church bells began ringing once more, announcing the beginning of their new life together, a messenger bearing the royal seal suddenly appeared in the doorway with news that would make even today's astonishing revelation seem small. The royal messenger walked steadily down the aisle as hundreds of stunned guests watched in silence. The church still trembled from Sebastian's revelations. Whispers lingered. Faces remained pale. Yet the messenger's arrival instantly commanded attention. The crimson seal carried in his hand belonged directly to the crown. Even the wealthiest nobles rarely received such correspondence. The messenger stopped before Duke Sebastian Ashcroft and bowed. Your Grace. Sebastian accepted the letter. Breaking the seal, he quickly scanned the contents. A smile touched his face. Not the amused smile people often saw. Not the confident smile of a powerful man. This was softer. Warmer. Almost boyish. Evelyn immediately noticed the change. What is it? She asked. Sebastian folded the letter. The king has heard the entire story. The church erupted into murmurs. The crown wishes to recognize the woman who chose character over fortune. Every eye turned toward Evelyn. The poor girl society had mocked for years suddenly found herself the focus of royal admiration. A year earlier, such attention would have terrified her. Now she simply squeezed Sebastian's hand. The applause began slowly, then spread, then thundered. People who had once laughed at her stood and clapped. People who had dismissed her rose to their feet. Even those who felt ashamed joined in. The sound filled the church. Not because Evelyn had wealth, not because she possessed influence, but because she had demonstrated something far rarer: integrity. For several moments she could only stand there, overwhelmed. Then Sebastian leaned closer. "They finally see you." Evelyn smiled through tears. "No." She looked at him lovingly. "They finally see us." The ceremony concluded moments later. Guests gathered outside beneath brilliant summer skies. Excitement filled the churchyard. Reporters rushed forward. Nobles expected a magnificent departure. After all, England's richest duke had just revealed himself. The finest carriage in the kingdom surely waited outside. Perhaps even a royal coach. Instead they found a bicycle. The same bicycle. The old black frame stood beside the church gates exactly as it had months earlier. The crowd fell completely silent. Then laughter appeared. Not cruel laughter. Affectionate laughter. The kind shared among people witnessing something unforgettable. Sebastian walked toward the bicycle. Evelyn followed. "Are we truly doing this?" she asked. "We began this journey on a bicycle." His eyes sparkled. "We should finish it on one." She laughed. A clear, beautiful sound that seemed to brighten the entire afternoon. Carefully he helped her onto the seat behind him. Guests cheered. Servants cheered. Even several former critics cheered. Then, with sunlight dancing across the countryside, England's richest duke and his new duchess rode away on a bicycle while dozens of golden carriages stood unused behind them. It became the most famous wedding departure in the kingdom's history. Years passed, then more years, and still people spoke about that day. Yet the bicycle was not what made Evelyn beloved. It was what she chose to do afterward. As Duchess of Ashcroft, she possessed enormous influence. Many expected her to spend it hosting grand parties. Others expected endless luxury. Instead, she remembered every painful year society had overlooked her. She remembered every doorway that had quietly closed. Every invitation that never arrived. Every person treated as less valuable because of circumstances beyond their control. She refused to let others endure the same loneliness. Within 5 years, Evelyn established homes throughout England for injured children. Not merely shelters. True homes. Places where physical disabilities were met with encouragement instead of pity. Places where abandoned widows could rebuild their lives. Places where vulnerable women found dignity instead of shame. Thousands benefited from her work. Many had never before encountered a noble willing to sit beside them, listen to them, and learn their names. Evelyn did all three. Again and again. Whenever reporters asked why she devoted so much time to such causes, her answer never changed. Because kindness rescued me. Her popularity grew beyond anything society had imagined. Children adored her. Workers respected her. The poor prayed for her. Even aristocrats who once mocked her eventually admired her. Beside her stood Sebastian. Still devoted. Still deeply in love. His greatest joy was not managing estates or attending royal functions. It was returning home each evening to the woman who had stayed when everyone else walked away. Their marriage flourished. Not because life was perfect. Because they faced every challenge together. Years became decades. Their hair silvered. Their children grew. Grandchildren filled Ashcroft Manor with laughter. Through it all, one tradition remained unchanged. On the first day of every month, Sebastian wrote Evelyn a letter. No matter where he traveled. No matter how busy life became. One letter. Every month. Sometimes romantic. Sometimes playful. Sometimes profound. But always sincere. Evelyn kept every single one. 25 years after their wedding, the nation prepared to celebrate the couple's anniversary. Newspapers called them England's greatest love story. Their daughter, Lady Charlotte Ashcroft, announced a surprise unveiling at the Ashcroft estate. Speculation spread immediately. Some expected a bronze statue of Sebastian. Others anticipated a magnificent memorial dedicated to Evelyn's charitable work. Thousands attended. The gardens overflowed with visitors. Reporters arrived from across Europe. The royal family sent representatives. As evening sunlight bathed the estate in gold, Charlotte stepped onto a small platform. Beside her stood an elegant glass pavilion covered by silk curtains. "My parents taught England something important," she said. "Today we wish to preserve that lesson." The curtains fell. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Inside the pavilion stood only one object. The bicycle. Nothing else. No jewels. No treasures. No elaborate monument. Just the bicycle. The same bicycle that had once carried a duke into public humiliation. The same bicycle that had carried two newlyweds toward happiness. Visitors immediately began crying. Many understood the symbolism. Some did not. Then Charlotte smiled. The story is not finished. She pressed a hidden latch. A concealed panel opened within the pavilion wall. Thousands of carefully preserved letters appeared behind glass. Sebastian's letters. Every monthly letter. Every year. Every decade. Every season of their marriage. The audience stood spellbound. Charlotte selected one final envelope. Its paper had yellowed with age. Its seal remained intact. This was father's final letter to mother. Silence settled across the gardens. She opened it carefully. Then read aloud. The bicycle was never my test. Many people began wiping tears from their eyes. Charlotte continued. The world was. The crowd listened without breathing. And you were the only person who passed. No one spoke afterward. They simply stood there. Some crying openly. Others holding hands. Many remembering people they loved. As twilight deepened around the pavilion, the bicycle gleamed softly beneath the glass. Not as a symbol of wealth. Not as a symbol of status. But as proof that genuine love can survive every illusion. Long after Sebastian and Evelyn were gone, newlyweds traveled from every corner of the kingdom to visit that pavilion. Children learned the story in schoolbooks. Grandparents told it beside fireplaces. Generations remembered the day an entire society chose a carriage while England's richest duke chose the woman who stayed. And in the end, history agreed that he had chosen the greater treasure.